Well, a month ago, we had no gaffer. Quite a shock to all of us. And here we are, sitting here 1 minute past 9 on this random 20th of June 2022. And the new manager is not Michael Carrick. It's not Ryan Mason. It's not Fabrizio Picaretta or indeed Paul Caddis. It is none other than Scott Lindsey, ladies and gentlemen. Last year's assistant manager has been appointed manager of Swindon Town Football Club on a 3-year deal. Fair to say, to a mixed response today. Opinion that we appear to be seeing across the board is split pretty much 50-50. And tonight I am delighted to welcome the wonderful Joe Vincent, Chris, Nathan, and excuse me, Max Springer, and whoever else wants to come on from you guys to discuss the pluses and perceived pitfalls of Scott Lindsey's appointment at the county ground. So without further ado, let's say hello to the guys. Joe, starting with you. Good evening, buddy. How are you?
Good evening, mate. Yeah, good. Thank you. Yourself?
Yes, not so bad. Thank you. Not so bad. Chris, good evening to you.
Hello from the small Yorkshire town where Scott Lindsey started his playing career.
Yes, that's the very same, and we'll be coming on to that. Nathan, good evening. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. I've just been listening to Backstreet Boys, so I'm ready to go.
Well, Backstreet's back. All right. And Max, good evening. How are you, fella?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Cheers for having me on again.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. So, listen, Max, you might as well stay on, mate. We'll get the ball rolling with yourself. Now, it's an interesting one, Max, isn't it? Because the club have come out with a statement today saying that there's been, I don't know whether this is verbatim, but it's been a long and exhaustive search over the course of last month. They've been working very, very hard to make sure they make the correct selection. We've all had an eagle eye on the betting odds for the last month or so. Various names have come and gone. Certain names have skyrocketed to the top of the list that all seem very feasible. And yet, almost left field, but yet, strangely not. Scott Lindsey's been appointed on this 3-year deal. What was your initial reaction, Max?
I mean, my initial reaction was underwhelmed. I guess you see the sort of names that have been popping up, and you go back to the night where Garner left and we're on here talking about Ryan Mason and Michael Carrick and names like that. So, like, naturally, there was a little bit of underwhelming, but I think as I've sort of absorbed the news through the evening, I'm growing to a little more, and I like what he said to BBC Wiltshire too.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Max, isn't it? I think I would love to see the reaction on social media and I know it's clearly a bit of a moot point because it never happened, but had he had the opportunity to come out, state his claim, explain the kind of football that he's expecting to play, state his case as to why he's there, what his attitude towards the club, his attitude towards the fans. I'd be interested to see whether we've got more of a swing. But I mean, Max, I don't know whether you think I'm being either generous or harsh, but obviously you would have heard my intro. I felt that the opinion on Scott Lindsey was kind of split 50-50 down the middle. Like you, Max, I think my initial reaction was one of, I wouldn't necessarily say I was ripping my hair out in despair, but I'm one of these really frustrating individuals that have been sort of spoiled, particularly in the first sort of 10 years, excuse me the pun, of my tenure as a Town fan, by the names like Glenn Hoddle, Ozzy Ardiles, Lou Macari, and even moving on to the likes of Steve McMahon. You know, it was a golden era where I fell in love with a football club, and every managerial appointment that Swindon make, I always kind of just, my heartstrings kind of pull me back to that era. So my initial reaction was one of, okay. Didn't really see that coming. But at the same time, I was kind of left a little sort of, I guess my head was full of questions. I mean, Joe, I'll bring you in at this stage. My head, Joe, was full of questions on the basis that all of the kind of chatter, and I appreciate we need to be careful here because a lot of the chatter was on social media, but all of the early chatter surrounding the two Scots were that they've been holding Zoom interviews with Charlton Athletic, and now that's all conjecture. We don't know that clearly for fact, but it all seemed to be that they were on their way out the door. So I think that was probably also kind of feeding into some of the negativity that I had earlier in the day when the announcement was made. Where was your head at, Joe, in that respect?
I think if you're going on the fact that Scott Marshall looks like he's gone to Charlton with Ben Garner, you'd imagine that Scott Lindsey was offered the chance to sort of follow suit. He's obviously chosen to stick around at the county ground. He was there as youth team coach, obviously. I think was it when Cooper was in charge. So he's got previous. He obviously loves the club. I think the script, you've got to look at it. You've got to look at it as if he's chosen to stay around, which is obviously something that you ask for in a person at a club. You know, loyalty is kind of forgotten these days in football. So I think I sort of echo what Max said earlier on. You know, it's not quite the sexy appointment that we all wanted, but you've got to get behind him. You know, he was part of the successes last season. He clearly has a lot of time for the football club, and if anything, that's all you can ask for from a first team manager, really.
All right, well, Chris, I mean, a very, very short question for you. Given that you're of a similar generation supporter to me, echoes of John Gorman?
There's a bit of it is like that as well, but now we've sort of had that little bit of time to get our head around it, because obviously I think we pretty much knew what was happening yesterday when the betting disappeared. So we've had all that time to sort of come to terms with it is going to be Lindsey. And of like say all the good things from what happened last year with Garner, and maybe the stuff that didn't quite work, like in particular the home form and playing a little bit too slow at times. Maybe he can learn from that and take that forward. So I think we can get some of the good points with Garner and work out on some of the bad points.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, Chris, isn't it? I think one of the, obviously I raised the point earlier about I'll be interested to see just how much opinion would have swung either positively or negatively, had we almost heard his patter and heard him set his stall out. But that was kind of almost like a key part of his patter, from what I interpreted, Chris, was that there was an acknowledgement that, he doesn't want to just kind of keep the ball at the back for gimmicks. He doesn't want to keep the ball at the back to make the stats look good. He very quickly progressed onto conversation or onto commentary around, playing up through the thirds, which, I mean, it's interesting to come out with a lot of, kind of football chat that not necessarily everyone understands. Technically, not everyone that turns up and watches games on a Saturday understands exactly what that means. But he then started using words like, being, aggressive, attacking. And again, it was similar to what Ben Garner said when he turned up at Charlton. They made a real point of focusing on that, didn't they, in Ben Garner's introduction video. So he was certainly whispering the sweet nothings in her ear, Chris, wasn't he, earlier?
Yeah, the first impression I got from listening to the BBC Wiltshire interview was it clearly wants to play quicker than we did last year. And I think that was probably our downfall a lot, especially at home, where we just played too slowly and it was so easy to defend against. Now, if we're playing that a bit quicker with that bit more tempo, it put us in a position where it's easier to break those teams down who just come and sit back. So
that's an interesting point. I mean, Nathan, I'll bring you in at this stage, because one of the questions that I was going to pose over the course of the evening was about, to what extent was last season about kind of trying to get the formula right, and that basically the penny dropped or the style of play clicked in the run-in, where we had that devastating run of wins, which really sort of propelled us back into the playoff spot, which we look to have lost with a handful of games left. And it really was almost like a miracle kind of turnaround. To what extent, Nathan, do you think it's realistic that we will be able to carry that form forward, given clearly we've still had significant departures from the squad? We've still got a lot of lads that are out of contract. But I guess if you get my point, to what extent is that, do players understand now what is required of them in terms of that pace and aggression and attacking, Nathan?
I mean, yeah, I think when Clem came originally, what he said was, he wants to have this model, this style, so that if a manager leaves, it's not a big deal and we can keep going on. And I feel like the players that stay from last season will know what we're about. And this for me is a positive about Lindsey staying on, is that the players from last year now, they know what's expected of them. And yeah, like Chris said, the most exciting thing I got from what Scott was saying was that he wants to be more aggressive, and it was when we were aggressive at the end of the season that we started to get those wins. So I think it's a promising sign. It obviously depends on who we get in, because our squad was bare last season and we needed a lot more depth. So yeah, it's interesting to see what Sandro Di Michele does, because that's going to be a big part in what happens going forward, because we need a few more players now to buy in that mindset. But I mean, it's definitely possible that the players that were here, I mean, apparently they're all big fans of Scott, which some people don't like, but I like it. I think it's good to play for a manager that you like. So yeah, I think potentially that kind of end of season form could really, if we can start like that, definitely that'll certainly get the fans on board.
I think it's interesting, Nathan, because much like the comments I made earlier, in relation to alleged interviews that Scott may have had with Charlton, or all the things that people seem to kind of commit to fact, even though they've just been bounded around social media. Similarly, I think the comments in relation to the players like him, I think there's been a lot of that bounding around social media, and who are we to know at the end of the day? The only ones that know that are the players. And I think one of the interesting things that is going to be coming out, I think, for me in this respect over the next couple of weeks will be about the contract negotiations, particularly with players that are hugely popular amongst the playing group, hugely popular with the supporters, not just because they're key players, but also because they play with a certain kind of like passion and flair towards Swindon Town. And I think contract negotiations with the likes of Manny Egbo, Jack Payne, I think those are going to be two really, really good indicators, I think, in relation to just how much the playing group really buy into Scott Lindsey. But I mean, Ty, I'll bring you in, Tyler, at this stage. I'm not sure if you've necessarily got it in front of you, but I know you know a fair bit about Scott. If you want to enlighten the listeners with Scott's managerial record to date and what you think he's going to bring to the piece, based on what we know about his career.
Well, like you've sort of been saying, he's obviously quite well regarded within the current squad and everything they've said. I can't tell you exact stats on how he's done as a manager in the past. But I know he had a spell as caretaker at Lincoln.
So allow me to just garnish the listeners with the stats. So in 2010, we'll talk about his playing career later for what relevance that it is. I mean, he spent most of his playing career in and around the higher echelons of non-league game. But in 2010, Scott Lindsey was caretaker manager at Lincoln City before taking the role at Tamworth. A very aggressive, ambitious Tamworth as they were back in 2013-14. 2014-16, he moved to Swindon Town, where he was manager of Swindon Town under-18s, before leaving in 2016 for Forest Green Rovers, where he became assistant manager. Departing Forest Green Rovers in 2019-21 to become manager of Chatham Town down in Medway, before returning to Swindon Town as assistant manager to Ben Garner in 2021. So, yeah, again, not a managerial career, Ty, that's necessarily laced with huge amounts of experience, but he's certainly got around a little bit, hasn't he, in the last sort of the last 12, 13 years?
Yeah. On paper, it's probably not one that people will look at and think that's brilliant. That's what we need. But I'd look at it and think, what are the people he's worked with and worked under? What have they got to say about him? Because that will show more of him as a coach and a person. And I think that's what's going to matter the most.
Interestingly, Ty, I mean, it's not really for us to sort of go into huge detail. We talk about his character, but excuse me, it's fairly well known that Scott Lindsey went through some pretty unbearable personal tragedy. Came out the other end with football sort of all rallying around him, singing his praises. I live not far from Medway Towns, where as a gentleman he's a very, very popular guy. His character references are significant. I think the thing that really excited me, Ty, was there were some comments that came out very quickly after his appointment that appeared to be sort of tipping a nod in the direction of fan engagement, and how he recognised that was incredibly important. And following on quite quickly from that were our good friends just down the road from me, the Medway Reds, that posted pictures and told stories of Scott Lindsey coming out and working with them on, I believe it was feeding the homeless in and around Medway, and how we dedicated a lot of time to doing that. So I think what I'm trying to say, Ty, is we've clearly got a guy. He's been dealt a couple of real bum cards in life, and he's really bounced back. He's very clearly very well regarded at Swindon Town. Whilst I've not got specifics and can quote people verbatim, the club have paid reference to that, haven't they? And as I say, if there was one thing that was sorely lacking last year in the minds of all fans, was engagement. Ty, was it not?
Yeah, like I was saying, I think as a person, going off what obviously Jonah's posted the photo of him, Stephen, and Scott sat together, and they all look buzzing with it. And you look at the players he's played under; some of them have come out since the announcement's made and speaking highly of him. And so that gives me hope in that regard. So I'm all for that. And then in terms of the fan engagement, last year, yes, it wasn't as good as it should have been and has to be. When you are a League Two club, you need to be engaging with your fans. That's how you get the next generation of supporters. And so I think that the way he's speaking of wanting to engage with the fans more is great. And like you've said, with what he was doing over at Chatham, what he's done over there is good going. So I think we're in safe hands, and I'm all for it. I know some of you had opposite reactions, shall we say, to start with, but I'm more than happy for Scott to be leading the way, and he seems a good lad and a good coach.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've been the first to hold my hands up, Ty. As I say, my initial reaction to the breaking news wasn't necessarily. As I think anyone that keeps half an eye on my Twitter feed will know that I put both feet straight in the Fabrizio Picaretta, Paul Caddis camp. Nothing against Scott Lindsey at all, but I just thought in terms of where we're at, in terms of engaging the supporters, in terms of excitement levels, a player in Paul Caddis who has played at the very, very highest levels of European football, captained us to 2 championship wins in this division, knows what it means to get out of this division, and actually has played for some huge clubs, actually, up and down the professional leagues. Very, very close relationship with the Swindon Town supporters. Ticks a lot of boxes in terms of exciting our fan base. And I think with Fabrizio, there was a combination of a respected coach, knows what it takes to get out of this division, working underneath Paolo Di Canio back in 2012, 2013, fondly remembered by the supporter base, has made a very, very strong statement about his commitment to the football club, how it's not about making a name for himself in England. This is about actually giving back to a club that gave him an awful lot over 10 years ago. And as two guys that clearly know each other and think very well of each other, that to me, there's probably a little bit of romanticism in that, but that for me was what gets me very, very excited. So if I compare and contrast that to Scott Lindsey, I was in conversations with my son earlier today, and I said to him, I liken it to taking him to our local sort of shopping centre with a trainer budget and saying, son, you buy whatever shoe you want off the wall. And then by the time he leaves JD or wherever it is, he's got a pair of Reebok Classics in his bag, which is because that's what I've told him he's got to have. That's kind of how I felt a little bit about Scott Lindsey. And again, nothing that got to stress, that is nothing personal to the new gaffer. That is me holding my hands up. I've come from an era of supporters where I have an era of supporting Swindon Town where I have been sport rotten. And who am I to know what budgets the club are playing with? Who am I? I mean, we all know the financial lay of the land back in 2010, 2011, 2012, when Paolo took over as boss, was very, very different to what we're working with now. I don't think Paul Caddis would necessarily have broken the bank, but I guess Again, you don't know how Paul's regarded by those who are running the club now, whether they feel that they know him well enough to have him working there as manager. They've obviously got best part of a year under their belts of working with Scott Lindsey now. So it feels like, much like a pair of Reebok Classics on your feet, a nice, safe appointment. It's always going to deliver the goods in terms of what you need on your feet, but is it going to blow my son's socks off like a £200 pair of Nike Fly Knits? Probably not. However, I was pretty sort of similar in my reaction to Richie Wellens' appointment. And Chris, we all know what happened there, don't we?
Yes. Well, it was the same really with Garner. I mean, no one was really excited about that appointment when it happened, and that turned out all right.
Yeah. Okay, so it's an interesting one. I mean, I don't actually want to spend too much time talking about Charlton's new boss. What I will say is that it turned out all right. However, it did take us sort of almost like 7/8 of the season to get to a stage where the supporters took to him to the point where they were singing his name. And that, to me, sort of smacks of a bit of a problem. And a bit of a problem that hopefully Scott Lindsey's already kind of come out and kind of explained or sort of, again, tipped his hat and said, we're going to try and address here, which is that issue of engagement. Are we going? If we're going to see the players more in the community, if we're going to see Scott more in the community, I am told that Scott is open and keen to joining us on the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge, as will Sandro and the other members behind the scenes. If that is something that's going to happen, and we're going to start having more engagement with them back and forwards in line with Clem's sort of mantra about transparency, outstanding. But I think that is one of that kind of feeds in, Chris, to sort of one of my reservations, really, when in terms of my initial gut reaction. It's one of, am I underwhelmed? Because there was a lot about Ben Garner's tenure that I was underwhelmed by. I don't ever really feel that, my imagination was really kind of, really stimulated by Garner Ball. I respect everything, Chris, that was achieved. I really do. Like, it was a miracle. I use that word to describe it. Like, on reflection, what he managed to deliver last year was a footballing miracle on a shoestring, and you've got to appreciate that. But there is something fundamental about football that it's more than what happens on the pitch. Yes, that winning is hugely important. That's why that's why these guys play the game. But to us as supporters, Chris, it's Saturdays is so much more than just what happens on that stretch of grass, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I think the thing with different with Garner, I think that just the sort of person he is when he's quiet, he just doesn't look like there's any emotion there. And we've already seen from Lindsey, like last season, that he had more about him in that way, that getting into it, that it meant more to him than it looked like it did to Garner. So that's a positive.
Yeah, exactly that. I guess he's come out and he's kind of recognised that. I think he's in a lovely position. I mean, Joe, I don't know what your thoughts are here, but Scott is in this lovely position now because he can basically, and I'm sure it paid part of his job interview strategy. He was able to kind of sit back over what was by and large a successful campaign and just highlight sort of obvious holes in that strategy, and highlight, maybe why the fans were a little bit hair trigger. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned earlier on, he was the assistant manager in a very successful season, and I think obviously in an assistant's position, he's almost not quite on the front line. He's sort of sat in a seat behind the soldier that's running first in Ben Garner, and he can sort of see where there may have been some shortcomings on his part. I know it's mentioned earlier on, but I think he spoke fantastically earlier on in the interviews with the club's media and also BBC Wiltshire. As it's mentioned earlier on as well, obviously you've seen the kit men on socials looking sort of proud as punch to be with him and looking quite happy for him. I was checking out the Instagram announcements as well. You've got quite a few players on there liking the posts. He's clearly got the club on his side internally. So yeah, I mean, it can't be a bad thing that he obviously experienced close to as good a season as can be last season. Really, obviously a penalty kick away from Wembley. So hopefully he can take on board, obviously, where he felt we just dropped short, and get that remedied, and obviously, take us one better next season and get us up. Because I can't do another League 2 season after this.
You, me, both, buddy. You, me, both. I mean, it's we are. I mean, there's been lots of talk about our, the size of our crowds, and Scott Lindsey's been very keen to come out and talk about the fact that he's managing this magnificent club with incredible home and away support, as he saw last season. I think it is incredible home and away support, and it's incredible home and away support that is actually leagues above League Two. And I think therein lies the issue that Scott, or the conundrum that Scott's got to answer.
I think he genuinely loves the club as well, though. I think it's something that we probably didn't have with Garner last season. He genuinely loves the club. I think he really cares about, obviously, how the team are looking from the fans' perspective. He was always one on the pitch as well at the end of the game, giving us a bit of not a thanks, but he was joining in with some of the songs. Obviously, seen some of the videos that have been posted on socials. I'll be the first to admit, like you, Hannah, I was kind of a bit meh when it got announced, or when it was looking like it was going to be announced. But the more I think about it, the more I'm on board.
Yeah, and you're not alone. You're not alone there, Joe. As I say, I think it's been well handled today in terms of the announcements, the various interviews, the way they've been put out, whether that be through Sky Sports or the content on the BBC. I thought the write up on the official club website was very well put together. And I think that's probably done wonders in terms of answering a few questions. And I think I can't help but think that some of the negative reaction that has come from it has been probably from, excuse the pun, guys, but I'm in your bucket as well, old guffers like me, who have got a very different frame of reference to younger supporters that maybe haven't been spoiled by the success that we had in the mid to late 80s, early 90s, and weren't spoiled by some of the names. I mean, Chris, in fact, let's have a chat about this, Chris, because how many times now have we had ex-players? I mean, we had Fraser Digby joined us last week, and I don't think I'm quoting him verbatim, but Fraser has sort of said along similar lines, talking about the appointment of Ozzy Ardiles and Glenn Hoddle at the football club, and about how it literally just blew people's socks off, that caliber of manager. And Fraser wasn't the first ex-town footballer to come on our show and talk in those terms. And I think that there's a lot to be said about, we were boxing well above our level, back in the mid 80s through to the mid 90s, weren't we? And as a consequence of that, our frame of reference is very different, say, to Tyler's, Chris, where, if you think back to Tyler's first season, for example, as he tells me, was around the time Charlie Austin was banging goals in for us. Now, if you think about the managerial figures that we've had at the club from that period onwards, you can have a very different perspective, Chris. You're going to react a very different way to Scott Lindsey being appointed, I would imagine.
Well, it was kind of like, as well, it's like we go through, you've got Huddle, Ardiles, there's even, obviously, I'm just thinking Gorman, Steve McMahon was in there, then DeCanio. But when you've had, say, like those three big names there, when you've had managers like that, there's a lot that's just going to be underwhelming when they come after it, knowing full well that as a club, we can attract names like that. And this time we haven't been able to. It was just, some people be just disappointed by that, thinking that, it's just the cheap option, which obviously Dean McKaylee said that it's not the cheap option at all. But that's the impression that a lot of people are getting.
Yeah, and interestingly, Chris, as well, a name that always gets overlooked, and probably because he wasn't around that long, was Dennis Wise. Of course, Dennis Wise brought Gus Poyet into the club as his assistant. And it is a manager of a similar kind of ilk. And I think one of the things that kind of gets us buzzing and gets us excited is, I think we very lazily think of big names like that and immediately assume that top players that would be representing us at League Two level next year are going to be interested in coming to play for those kind of managers. But herein lies the rub, Chris, doesn't it? Do we really want players that are coming to play for Glenn Hoddle, Paolo Di Canio, Dennis Wise, Ozzy Ardiles? Or do we want players that are going to come and play and want to play for this great club and these great supporters that Scott Lindsey talked about today? Because it kind of, we kind of can't have our cake and eat it, can we? But the more I'm speaking against my kind of gut reaction, the more my brain just says, of course we want players that are going to come and want to play for this crowd and play for the club, play for the badge, sweat blood for Swindon Town Football Club. And perhaps that's not always been the case, is it?
Well, no, it's not. And it's a very good point there. We do want players that want to come and play for the club and not for a specific manager, because if something happens and they're off, then what happens to the players? Are they just going to lose interest? If they're only coming just because of who the manager is? But another name, actually, I wanted to bring up as we were talking, that at the time opened our eyes a bit, was Roy Evans.
Roy Evans is a fascinating example, and yeah, I'll take you Roy Evans, and I'll see you a Paul Sturrock, because again, Sturrock hadn't long, been shown the door at Southampton, had a very decent record in terms of what he'd achieved down the road at Plymouth. So again, we're talking big name managers, aren't we? They didn't necessarily have to be tracksuit managers, did they? But big name managers. I think I just the strange one about Scott Lindsey's appointment, I think, was that it seems to have just caught so many people by surprise, because I think that there was such an emphasis on looking at the betting odds, which seem to be changing sort of day by day. I mean, we had that. I mean, even the betting firms seem to be losing their marbles by offering odds for both the Matt Taylors on the same odds line, which was utterly bizarre, given one of them has failed miserably at Walsall, only ever really been a youth team coach and former player at Swindon Town Football Club, youth team coach at Tottenham. And then you've got Matty Taylor down the road that's just taken Exeter up and done an immeasurably different job. But yet they were both lumped in at the same time. I mean, the betting odds were absolutely balmy. I mean, Max, I'll get your take on this. I mean, what is there any takeaway, Max, from your perspective on following the betting odds? Because they really have led the Swindon Town support base on a merry dance, haven't they?
Both Matt Taylor thing is proof that they just meant absolutely nothing, and they didn't have a clue. They knew as much as we did, because Scott Lindsey only popped up on it yesterday, maybe the day before, and you'd have to think that Di Michele's been doing this, as he said, for 2.5-3 weeks, and at some point the move to Charlton must have fell through, and that's when he probably formally applied for it. But even when the Graham Ricks thing went on and his name was on the list at one point, it just shows. I think at this level, that the betting odds don't really mean that much until one journalist or whatever gets light of it from the club and lumps 100 quid on it, and then they just suspend the odds anyway. That's usually how it comes up, doesn't it?
I mean, it's an interesting one, Max, because at one point we were. We obviously have a Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge WhatsApp group, and our illustrious council of 20-odd people that feed into our show were all sort of speculating on the odds and how balmy they were. And the general take of it was, right, let's all just stick a fiver on Fraser Digby off the back of last week's show, just to kind of almost prove a point. That and
he probably would have been the favourite.
Yeah. So it's. I mean, again, it's all this buts and maybes, isn't it? It may not have caused a ripple, but it just goes to show you just the extent to which we had any kind of faith in the betting odds, well, rightly or wrongly. But I'll introduce a new face to Tom Broadbent Lounge. We're going to bring Tom Paris in from STFC Trust. Good evening, Tom. How are you?
Evening, Hannahs. Evening, everybody.
Congratulations on making your show debut, buddy. How's it feel? Gold ribbon stuff.
I'm a little bit nervous, to be honest. It's first time putting myself out here like that. So, take it easy on me.
Yeah, well, you're in very good company, Tom. You're in very good company. What have you made of today's shenanigans, Tom? Did you, like us, have you had a kind of range of emotions across the day, or did you feel that, from the get-go it was the right move, or otherwise?
Kind of similar to everybody else's feelings tonight and what's been summarised. Obviously, rumours started going quite strongly last night with the betting odds being suspended and the Town End Forum going a bit crazy in rumours and rife and strife. And then when it got announced today, it was kind of, as everybody said, a bit underwhelming in my opinion. But as the evening's gone on, the more you think about it, people talk about the delay between Ben Garner leaving and the appointment today, but if you're thinking about it from a business perspective, that delay really, I think, is more along the lines that they wanted to replace Ben Chorley first before then, and allowing the new technical director of football to appoint the coach. That's my personal opinion rather than any sort of fact, but it makes more logical sense to me. Then you take the approach of Scott Lindsey coming in. At the end of the day, he knows the club inside out. He knows the players inside out. I would imagine it will be a version 2 of Ghana Ball next season. And if Scott is clever enough about it, he'll recognise the flaws of last season. He'll recognise the strength of what we had at the end of the last season. And fundamentally, although we were one real spot kick away from Wembley at Port Vale, in that second game at Port Vale, we really got shown up with how little aggression and strength we really had to go and attack the ball. And on balance, in that second game, Vale really demonstrated the strength of playing with that aggression, with attacking fast football. And ultimately, that's what got them up the league. So if that's the sort of model that we're trying to capture, that high press, that fast football moving forward, then I can only just see us doing really, really well next season. We've got a strong nucleus of a squad. We've got somebody who knows the club and the team and the players individually, inside and out. We're in a much, much, much stronger position than what we were last season. So, I don't really think it's going to make much of a difference if Ben Gardner was here or Scott Lindsey. The only difference is we've got somebody that's coming in with potentially some fresh ideas on how to take it to the next level.
Well, look, Tom, I'll pick up on a couple of things that you said there. You've raised some really, really interesting points. I think the first one, you sort of tapped into a point that we mentioned earlier. I was talking about the importance of re-signing players, the likes of Manny Egbo, Jack Payne, etc. Now, okay, for me, I think Jack Payne's a really, really interesting situation for us to monitor over the next week or two, because Jack Payne is the kind of player and has the kind of ability to unlock defences and score goals in leagues higher than League Two. Now, Jack Payne, you would think, would have been one of the names that, as a free agent, would have been snapped up very, very, very quickly if his agent was bounding his name around other clubs. And I can't help but think that if Jack Payne moves in the next week or two, whether that be up the leagues or perish the thought to another club in League Two, which would be an absolute travesty, I think that probably... I actually think that tells us a lot. It maybe paints a picture of finances behind the scenes, but I think it also paints a picture as to the pulling power of Scott Lindsey as head coach and how much our top players are buying into that vision. To an extent, I think Manny Egbo's in that bowl as well, albeit Manny Egbo's, it would appear that he's been very open about the fact that, he wanted to move abroad. I think that was pretty much in the vernacular of Ben Garner. And no doubt, as a lad that is well known in and around South East London, as a lad that really delivers for Ben Garner, as a relationship for him, he will be on Charlton's radar as well. Now, if we manage to re-sign those two players, Tom, I don't know how you feel, but that is a big signal of intent. And I think the other point about Ben Garner and style of play is that I know an awful lot of lads that sit behind the dugout, and when times were particularly tough and we were playing at our turgid worst, when we had a particularly poor run, they were all telling me that when we were messing around with the ball at the back, playing vanity football, and when things weren't quite clicking, that Ben Garner was very, very clearly vocal in screaming at his players, get the ball forward faster, like pick up the tempo, play aggressively. So I go back to my earlier point. I can't help but think that it was a system that we were working on and developing, and it just clicked with that position, with that formation change towards the end of the season. It just clicked, and we didn't really look back. I've not really posed your questions there, Tom, so I guess I need to sort of pose you a couple off the back of it. A, do you think I'm being fair? And B, do you understand my logic, both in terms of the re-signings of two key players in particular, and also that point about the kind of the change in tempo that we saw, the change in rhythm that we were playing under Ben Garner, and how that did change towards the end of the year.
Yeah, like I would agree with a vast majority of everything you just said. The only thing that I would say is, in particular to Jack Payne, I don't agree that if Jack Payne doesn't sign or re-sign for the club, it's a reflection on any negative part to the club. Jack has come to the club and done phenomenally well for us. He was the leading light last season amongst a lot of other leading lights. And if the rumours that I hear from various fans forums and all that sort of stuff are correct, that Jack's contract was partly funded by Lincoln for whatever reason that would be, then it might be more of a financial sense that actually, whilst he was playing for us, he was on a very good wage for the rest of it. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but if Jack does move on, he's deserved it, and I sincerely hope that it is up the leagues, because that is what he does deserve if he is going to move on. But if he is going to re-sign or if he's going to sign for a team in League Two, why wouldn't he want to sign for Swindon is my logic. So I think the only reason why Jack wouldn't re-sign for Swindon and stay in League Two is only because he's got an offer to go up the leagues. And I wouldn't hold that against him. He's done phenomenally well for us. I sincerely hope that Egbo signs, because he was brilliant. He came in at left back, and although he didn't play many games for us, he had offered so much from his position that we'd been missing for most of the season, and was a cracking free transfer signing. So yeah, if we do sign them, then happy days. We've got it just adds to that really strong nucleus already between Williams, Reedy, and McCurdy up front. So it's going to look good if we get both of those on board as well, for sure. And I'd be quite tempted to stick at least 50 quid on Swindon winning the league next year if they both sign.
I'll get you money bags. All right for some.
I'd have to borrow it from my mum.
That's fair enough. Don't we all? Look, I'll just take this moment. We've got a sizable listener list, guys, and obviously the show is nothing without you lot. If you're sitting here listening into the show on a smartphone, please do hit that speaker request button. Join us tonight. Share your points of view. Let us know your thoughts, good and bad. We're not here to browbeat anyone. If you're feeling, not necessarily chipper about it, we're here to rub some ointment in the wound if we can. But all points of view thoroughly respected. Appreciate Twitter doesn't always necessarily give off that vibe when we're all sort of sat on our keyboards, typing away and engaging in debate that isn't spoken. But please do hit that speaker request button and join in the debate tonight, because we're really, really, really keen to hear your thoughts. We're lucky that we've got people from the club, people connected with the club, all on the listener list. And guys, same story with you. Appreciate politically it can be very difficult coming on at these times and talking. But if we'd be really, really interested in hearing your sort of first-hand stories about the gaffer. And what you believe the gaffer brings to the table. Some of you have been on before, some of you will be new faces to us. We don't throw people under the bus, so please do come on, guys. But Nathan, whilst people are contemplating whether or not they do actually want to join us tonight, I'll come back to you, because from the get-go, when rumours started really surfacing this morning, you were really positive, weren't you, from a point of view of, look, this is our gaffer, I'm behind him unconditionally. Is that a fair way to describe your position on this, Nathan? Or have you got a fragile confidence, or are you wholeheartedly behind the gaffer? And the reason I ask this is that I've had debates with a cross section of Swindon Town fans today, which appear to suggest that the confidence, typical Swindon Town, but their confidence is a little brittle. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Nathan, is you obviously are someone that was confident from the get-go. Is your confidence as brittle as the next man, or have you got a different take on that?
I'm always confident. Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction last night was actually quite bad. Like when the odds got slashed and they suspended the betting, I was like, my initial reaction was, that's a bit tin pot. But it didn't take long for me to think about it and actually change my mind, which is why this morning I was as positive as I have been.
Why was it tin pot, Nathan? First and foremost, let me really get inside inside your mind, Nathan. What was your gut? Because I think your gut reaction is going to reflect quite a lot of the Swindon Town supporter base's gut reaction. So I'm really, really keen to understand your thought process.
So my thought was, and I think like a few other people, I'd been dragged in by the names that were linked. I was seeing Michael Carrick, I was seeing Ryan Mason. When you see those names, it's like if I was to dangle a bit of chicken over my dog and then give him a bit of broccoli, he's going to be upset. So I think it was that kind of thing where I started to get a bit excited, and it'd been quite a while since we knew Garner was going, and so my initial reaction was, why has it taken 3 weeks, a month to appoint the guy that was number 2? And that was what just kicked in at my gut. But it was then I started reflecting and thinking, well, I don't know what's happened. He could have just been the best person that interviewed. I don't know what went on, and I think I'm a big fan of continuing things that are working. And I know a lot of people thought last season, we should have gone up, and there's definitely a case for that. But regardless, you put last season in the context that it deserves. We had a really good season, and funnily enough, I left Port Vale with you, and obviously I was gutted, but there was a part of me that actually felt okay, because I think we'll be all right next season. We've built something here that's gonna grow next season. Obviously, that was then completely kicked to the wall by Garner going to Charlton, and that was why I was so. I wasn't particularly upset about Garner, the man, leaving. I was upset because I thought we were building something, and now with Lindsey staying, for me, that is a good thing. He's a well-respected coach. I've seen a lot of this stuff about the cheap option. Like, yeah, he might be a cheap option, but he's a cheap option that knows what he's doing, that knows the club. And, at the end of the day, we're in debt. And, if you're in debt, you don't go and buy a Mercedes, you don't go and buy luxury things. You live within your means. And I think we've potentially got, I think we've got a good coach. How he is as a manager, I can't say. None of us really know how he's going to be as a manager, but we've got a good coach, that's probably is quite cheap. So what? I drive a Kia. It's a good car. It gets me from A to B. It does the job, and that's kind of my point. It's no frills. It's not exciting. It's underwhelming. I understand that, but at the end of the day, he's come out and said we want to be aggressive, and I think that word just seems to have turned a lot of people. Like I saw one person on Twitter, who I won't name, who went from "I'm not renewing my season ticket" to listening to that interview going, "I'm fully behind him." I mean, that kind of shows how frail and fickle we all are as fans. But it just that one word just seems to resonate with people, and that makes me feel a bit more excited. Obviously, I don't know. I can't say for sure that we're going to be champions or whatever, but I think we've got the core of a good squad. I think we've got a good coach. I don't know if Scott Marshall is going. I don't know who we're going to bring in, but I think there's reasons to be optimistic, definitely.
Well, all right, Tyler, I'll bring you back in at this stage, because we're talking about that word aggression. I mean, fundamentally, we are buyers of products, aren't we? I hate to describe us as that, but as football, I know there's so much more to it as football fans. But if you talk about season ticket holders now, right, we buy a season ticket holder. It's a big commitment, and we don't sit there with a crystal ball, do we? But what we do is we buy that season ticket. We buy into that overarching support and fandom of our football club. But you can't help but think we are still purchasing are, a certain hope that we are going to play. There is nobody on this world that wants to go and buy a product that fundamentally underwhelms. Now, to Nathan's point about driving a Kia versus, let's say, driving a Ferrari, right? That's a very, very different kind of conversation that involves different sort of like financials and whatnot. But when you buy a season ticket, or you are committing to a long period of time supporting Swindon Town going into the new season, let's say you're a new season ticket holder and you're taking that plunge, given that the club are pushing to try and up the bar from 4,500 to 6,000 tickets, Tyler. That the style of football is important, isn't it? Because there's so many other entertainment opportunities for people to go and enjoy. And if you have been if you are a little bit battle weary at Swindon Town, following Swindon Town Football Club, that word aggression and attacking, Ty. He's got to lead with that, hasn't he?
Yeah, just one thing before I dive into that. Ferraris are shit and unreliable. I'd much rather have a Renault. But beside the point, I'm sure Max will get what I'm saying with that.
100%, mate.
No, I think what you're saying about aggressive attacking football is sort of the right thing to say. And football is about entertaining the fans, and like you say, it is a product that you're buying into. But at the same time, everyone enjoys something different with football. Some people enjoy the sort of long ball Steve Evans type. I don't. I'm very much not into that personally. But I think if the route we are going to go is the playing out from the back and the style, I think if we can do it in an aggressive manner with high pressing, getting the ball working through the lines, and it's the right way to do it, and it will get more bums on seats in turn doing it that way.
Now, Claire, please take this the right way, Claire Follett. I am not going to categorise you as a certain type of fan. I'm really, really interested in getting your point, Claire, on, let's say, Scott Lindsey came out today and said, essentially, I am all about, I am a continuance. This is about continuity. This is about stability. I know the players. I know what to get out of the players. Would that have excited you, Claire, as a long-standing Swindon Town supporter, going into the new season, or would you? What would have been your reaction? Do you think, the words aggression and attacking, is what's kind of maybe floated your boat or otherwise today?
Hi, Hannah's and everyone else. I suppose I'm a little bit different.
Good evening.
I'm a little bit different because, likewise with Garner's interview that he did with Charlton, we all know what he said wasn't what he sort of did last year. So I sort of take, they're sort of a show reel to me, and that doesn't really sway me either way. But to be honest, Hannah's, I'm happy with Lindsey, and I think you should put your positive pants on and get them grumpy ones off.
I'm doing my best, Claire. I'm doing my best. Listen, Claire, I take your point.
I don't think you should be underwhelmed. I think that this has been created by a few in the fan base by saying certain names like Mason and Carrick and all that it now may feel underwhelming. But if none of this rumour mill had happened from the start, if Garner would have been announced as leaving, and then they said, okay, Garner's left, Scott Lindsey's now head coach, would you have felt as disappointed with none of those other names in the frame? I don't know. And if the players are coming out and saying how much they respect and they're praising Scott Lindsey, surely that's a big plus in itself. That's to me, that's more important to me about what they say about him as a man. And if he's done a lot of the work last season, that's a head start for us already, because he hasn't got to get to know those players. They haven't got to get to know him and decide whether they want to play for him or the new coach. So I'm all for it. I got my positive pants on until results say otherwise.
And I think, Claire, that is an absolutely spot on attitude to have. I think going back to our earlier points about, I don't want to just throw Richie Wellens' name in there, but let's just use that as an example. The world and his dog were fairly negative about, the Richie Wellens experience before the Richie Wellens experience actually properly kicked in. And I think that the really interesting thing about what we ended up getting from Richie Wellens was engagement. It was power football. It was dynamic. It was exciting. And then the more and more that football was being played, the more sort of better quality players we added to it. That I think with Richie, he had a black book of contacts, which enabled him to work around the leagues, bring some really exciting players into the club. And I think, that in itself, I think just nails your point, Claire. I'll bring Dean on for a show debut. Dean, good evening. How are you?
Evening, Hannes. How you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thank you for joining us, mate. And thank you for your wonderful comments you've been sharing with us over the last couple of weeks. It's great to have you on board as a listener and now a speaker as well. I mean, Claire makes a really good point, Dean, doesn't she? In terms of, listen, I'm going to be positive until results tell me otherwise. I mean, whilst there's me sitting here saying that football's so much more important than just the winning or losing, fundamentally, when it comes to judging our manager, there's no other way in judging, really, is there?
No, spot on. To be fair, you can't really judge it in any other way, but I think we're being a little bit unfair as well. At first, I've said it online as well, I was underwhelmed myself personally. I've had a look at the names we was linked with, but to be fair, Lindsey's got more coaching behind him than the ones we were linked with. He's got more Football League experience, so maybe we are being a little bit harsh. How they come about the decision, that's questionable. That's always fair enough. We can always ask those questions.
Dean, not on that, mate. You raised an interesting point. So to what we touched on this earlier, but to what extent do you think when we look at the likes of a Michael Carrick, a Ryan Mason, are we kind of blinded by this sort of, I don't know, do we just allow our brains to just conveniently connect with the fact that next thing you know, we're going to have 4 or 5 exciting ex-Manchester United youngsters because of Michael Carrick, or Ryan Mason. We're going to basically suddenly start getting the cream of Tottenham's youth academy kind of flowing back into Swindon Town. But I mean, that's all very nice for the cosmetic, isn't it? But it doesn't always work, does it? I mean, I rewind back to the likes of Charlie Colkett and Ishmael Farouz and guys like this that came in from Chelsea that on paper looked very exciting, but waste of time, wasn't it, Dean?
No, exactly. It's I think we're quite unique though in the way that we've got a bit of a relationship that a lot of other clubs probably haven't, in that sense where you've had Macari, Ardiles, Hoddle, so we kind of cling on to that and hope that we're going to get the next big one again. But it's a different world now, football. Hoddle, okay, would have taken a huge pay cut, of course he would, but it was not on the levels that these boys would be taking. These lads, Carrick and Mason, the wages that they'll be earning now, just as coaches, it'd be a good few years' salary for a manager down here easily. So there's a huge jump, and I don't know whether they're comfortable doing it by the look of it. You don't really see many of them doing it now. The only one you've seen in a while, I would say, Hughes, who was the next Premier League manager.
Yeah.
Come down recently. We've had the odd one or two, haven't we? But in terms of youngsters, do you really see any of them doing it anymore? Joey Barton, but that was because no one else would really touch him at the time, would they?
Well, you raise an interesting point, Dean, don't you? Because even back in the day when we appointed Glenn Hoddle, I mean, there was a guy that, I mean, I'm sure he was a very wealthy man, but a very, very different level of wealth to what you've got now.
Yeah, totally
and a totally different range of motivations as well.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a plan. He knew what he wanted to do, and I think he was light years ahead, so he's probably not a great example. But we took risks. Macari was different. We were pretty much similar to where we are now. But his playing influence wasn't a huge difference, and his contacts in the game, he just ruled with an iron fist, didn't he? I don't think Mason or Carrick would have done that, for example. Have they got the contacts in the lower level? If Carrick comes there and he brings Kovar back, are people going to be happy? Is that the level of players that we're going to get? You just don't know. it's a gamble. It's a huge gamble, but maybe it's one of those ones where is it a gamble worth taking with someone you know and stick with it and see what happens rather than bring someone else in and have to go through it all again like we did last summer. You know, I think you touched on something earlier actually when you mentioned about Egbo and Payne. I think that they're very interesting because it'd be if they go, he can't lose. I don't think Lindsey with this one because if Egbo goes to Charlton, he's gone with a friend. If Payne goes higher up, he's doing the right thing. Whereas if those two boys resign, then I think it could maybe throw a spanner in the works when it comes to mentioning budgets and things like that because I said it tongue in cheek earlier. Would you employ Lindsey if it meant you could keep players like Payne and Egbo? And it's an interesting one because would you use some of the budget to get a different manager in and let those players go? So it's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Okay, it's an interesting one. You obviously, I believe, unless I've misheard you, Dean, you mentioned McCurdy there as a player.
Oh no, not McCurdy, Payne and Egbo.
Payne, right. So I'm going to mention McCurdy because I think we haven't mentioned him yet. McCurdy is obviously clearly a player that needs to be man managed, and I think if you think that Ben Garner, Scott Marshall, Scott Lindsey were as a triumvirate were three individuals that really got the best out of Harry McCurdy last season without a full pre-season at Swindon Town. I mean, surely the idea of having at least one of that triumvirate in place that kind of gets Harry, that understands the kind of personality that he is a free spirit. I think that's got to be exciting, hasn't it? Surely, because clearly one of the most explosive, dynamic footballers in League Two last season, off the back of no full pre-season, I might add. And I appreciate it took a little while to get going. But to still have somebody in place that would have a excuse the pun, a steady hand on the Harry McCurdy tiller, that's got to be a good thing, isn't it, going into the new season?
Yeah, definitely. It's and you got to remember as well. Okay, Garner's gone. I think, as far as I know, or from what we've been told officially, he's the only one who's actually left, hasn't he? So far as things stand, so we're only losing one person. Okay, it's the manager or head coach, but the backroom staff, everyone associated, the fitness team, they're all still there. So, as I'll say it again, tongue in cheek, but as a few of you have mentioned, he didn't seem about a laugh, to be fair, Ben Garner. So I'm not sure he was the one who was having a good laugh with McCurdy week in, week out, was he? But I might be talking out of turn. But yeah, there's a good few of them still there.
Well, no, it's an interesting point because, I mean, listen, if you've got a head coach, I mean, I'm talking old school parlance here, but, the manager tended to always be the kind of stiffer broom, if you will. And the coaches were known to be the ones that kind of put their arm around their shoulders and kind of, gave players a shoulder to cry on. Now, if you're talking about somebody, a player that does require a bit of management, the appointment of Scott Lindsey could be an absolute masterstroke in that respect. And then going on to Jack Payne's relationship with Harry McCurdy. I mean, Ty, I'll bring you back in at this stage because obviously Jack Payne and Harry McCurdy have a very, very close relationship on and off the pitch. I mean, if you would like to think if you've got a coach that can keep Harry McCurdy happy, you would like to think that you've got a coach that's going to keep Harry McCurdy's best mate Jack Payne happy as well, aren't you?
You'd hope so. I mean, it was what we were sort of told when we went into the kit room. It was that Payne is a bit like McCurdy's handler. So I think it's more if you can keep Jack Payne happy and just let him deal with Macca, then you're on to the winner. Because let's be honest, I think keeping hold of McCurdy and having Payne who can sort of just keep him in check is the key, because by the sounds of it, he did like Garner's job for him in terms of managing him.
Yeah. Well, we've got, I mean, okay, so there's been, I mean, a couple of interesting sort of stories have started breaking in relation to players today. No discussions around outgoings necessarily, but one that we could probably have a conversation about, Ty, on the basis that we have now, it looks like we're about to make our first sort of signing of the summer. And it's going to be in the tongue-tied, the goalkeeping department, where we are bringing a young Middlesbrough lad in, aren't we? Now, the young Middlesbrough lad is signing on loan from what we can tell. And despite my protestations earlier today about I'm hoping it doesn't mean curtains for Jojo, on the basis we've still got Wardy here next year, we're bringing this youngster in from Middlesbrough. It would kind of start to point to the fact that we're not going to waste a loan place on a goalkeeper if he's being signed as a third choice Manny Idem replacement. So would you say that's fair?
I'm slightly confused what you're asking of me there, if I'm honest.
Right, so we're basically going to be bringing a goalkeeper in on loan, which would appear to suggest after a successful half a season in the Scottish second tier, we are essentially not going to be taking up a loan signing or goalkeeper as a loan signing if he's coming in as a third choice keeper, are we?
No, but he's not going to be third choice. Let's not beat around the bush there.
So I guess my question is, Ty, I've just got to say it. It's curtains for Jojo, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think most people have sort of come to that assumption anyway. I think he thought he was a little bit too, maybe not too good, a bit too big for Swindon after qualifying for the World Cup potentially. So I mean, I'm not going to hold anything against him. He did well when he was here, and I wish him all the best should he move on. And
I think he had a tough gig though, Ty, didn't he? In many respects, because the Ghanaian management were very they weren't backwards in coming forwards, were they? When Jojo returned from the World Cup qualifiers, in basically being disparaging about the fact that Jojo was playing in the English fourth tier, despite the fact his other two goalkeepers were playing in the in playing four teams that you would expect Swindon Town to give a good run for their money, if not beat. They were a little disparaging. It was almost like they allowed themselves to sort of fall into cliche. I appreciate we're a Swindon Town sort of Twitter space, so we're going to say that. But that must have been quite hard for Jojo, sort of coming away from that environment with those words ringing in his ears and worrying about, hang on, am I going to miss the boat here? Because the world's going to be a very different place in 4 years when the next World Cup rolls around, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the exact quote was he can't be the goalkeeper for the Black Stars playing in the fourth division. I think that's very harsh. I think he got there on merit, and so does it matter what division he plays in if he's just qualified your team for a World Cup? No,
and
it doesn't. That's like England calling someone up from the Championship, which we did with Calvin Phillips before obviously Leeds got promoted, and he did well. So.
And let's be clear, Ty. Let's be clear. He's vying for a place in the starting 11 for the Black Stars against a lad that plays in the top flight in South Africa and a guy that plays in the top flight in Switzerland. I mean, those are leagues that I'm pretty sure, ability-wise, aren't going to be a million miles away from the the English EPL sort of second division, are they?
No. Well, I mean, to put it simply, Rafael Rossi Branco was a raging success in the top division of Switzerland. So that sort of shows the quality there to me. Because as much as I did love Rafa, I don't think it was that good.
So I've purposely avoided going back to Jack Payne, Harry McCurdy, Manny Egbo as all lads that have been sort of been rumoured around social media to be, potentially drawing attention from elsewhere, or just because they're out of contract, will they stay, will they go? I've kind of deliberately avoided putting Jojo in that bucket because it's a very different kettle of fish, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've not actually seen any teams rumoured to be wanting him at the moment. So, like I say, it's an interesting one, and no matter what happens, if he stays, great. He's a good keeper, and I'm glad we'd have him. And knowing that we'd obviously lose him for that World Cup period, but you can't really say, no, you're not going to go and play at a World Cup.
All right. Well, look, Joe, I'll bring you back in at this stage. So we were talking, I think Dean made the point. He didn't use the word vanity necessarily, but certainly touched on the coaching prowess of Scott Lindsey versus some of the other names that were being mentioned. from a, it's an interesting point to just sort of linger on, Joe, and I wanted to take your view on it if I can. I appreciate, Joe, the Lou Macari era was before your time, but Lou Macari, yes, Glenn Hoddle was known to be a bit of a visionary back in the day, but Ozzy Ardiles as another example, and to an extent Paolo Di Canio. These were all people that had sort of no coaching experience at all, and yet we gobbled them up off the back of the fact that they were just big names. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is, Joe, like we've got at some point, we as a fan base have got to let go of this vanity piece, haven't we? Because to what extent, Joe, do you think this vanity sort of obsession that we've developed as a club is holding us back? Because to go back to the point I was making earlier about, potentially, there are fans out there that have got brittle confidence. To what extent is that hindering us as a club? To what extent do you think we just need to take our medicine and just say, look, the world's moved on. Scott Lindsey's got, the best part of a year under his belt coaching our football club, doing a bloody good job at our football club, as the record would show. And it's time for us to just sort of swallow that now, just get on with it. Leave all that in the past. Yeah, we enjoyed it. We look back with great fondness, but it's just time to let go.
Yeah, I think you've probably hit the nail on the head there, Hannes. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, I think everyone wants a sexy name because, it's going to bring in kids into the ground to go and see this big superstar manager. You probably need to get the Sky cameras, the county ground, like your Salford every week. You've got a Michael Carrick in the dugout. But as you say, Scott Lindsey's been around the building for, not just last season, beforehand. I think he signed Ellis Iandolo for the club when he was working in the youth team. So he's clearly got a bit about him. I think obviously if you look back at the previous scaffers that we've had in big name wise, in my time it's probably only really Di Canio. But even with that, it was great obviously for the first season. Second season, after a hint of success, you're going to have people sniffing around them. Sunderland come in the Premier League. I know the Matt Ritchie fiasco didn't really help, and obviously some financial worries at the club as well. But you're probably going to bring in more unwanted attention if it's a big name. Obviously with Scott Lindsey, we've got a chance he's got a chance as well to kick on in his first team coaching career if he's successful with us. It kind of benefits both parties. So yeah, I think you've got to look at it with a level head and think, if we do appoint a big name, that's going to come with its positives and negatives, and vice versa as well. Yeah, I can also just say as well, it's nice to welcome the midfield destroyer of Fabrizio Carrick's noble men in Dean onto the show for next Sunday.
Don't mention the word Fabrizio. You just depressed me.
Sorry.
I just about got over the emotional loss that is not seeing. No, I jest. Yeah, no, indeed. It's always great to have extra new voices coming on the show. Dean's spoken fantastically well so far, and hopefully we'll continue to do so. So, okay, well, listen, let's have a little bit of fun with this then, Joe, because there has been strong rumour going around the Twitter sphere this evening that Scott Marshall is going to be disappearing off to Charlton with Ben Garner, and we've got to state at this stage that is just nothing more, nothing less at the moment than just rumour, unless someone can tell me otherwise. So,
I think, didn't Scott Lindsey allude to that in one of his interviews as well, that Scott Marshall had gone as well?
Right. Okay. So let's go with the. But I feel a lot happier saying that if that's what Scott's put out there, fantastic. Certainly something that I've missed. So let's have a little bit of fun with this then, Joe. Clearly, we're now in a position where we've got to start thinking about who's going to come in and assist. That in itself is a lovely little rumour mill, isn't it? Now, Scott Lindsey being of the mindset of engagement and knowing that there is he's pushing against an open door on that front. Who would you like to see come in as an assistant, Joe?
Well, am I out of order to say Paul Caddis? I think.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're out of order. I think you're playing up to me there, Joe. You're just trying to curry favour, aren't you?
I am, yeah. Obviously, the supporters club, their Monday night panel this evening. I think Paul was supposed to be on the show, wasn't he? And then ended up having to cancel. Was that a phone call? Was it? He had an important phone call to take.
I don't know, Joe.
Mr.
Was it?
Lindsey. Oh well,
I don't know, Joe. Was it?
You never know. I think. Do you know what? As well, how great would that be to have two people in the club in the hot seat that clearly have a great affection for the place. I've just seen as well that Burnley apparently have bid £5 million for Scott Twine. So if that goes through, if that comes through, give Scott Lindsey and Paul Caddis a nice little piggy bank. Yeah, I think that captures a bit of the imagination.
I think, Joe, to be fair, I think you're absolutely bang on. I mean, if Scott Lindsey appointed Paul Caddis as his assistant manager, I think that would be an absolute masterstroke. And I think almost overnight, you dismiss a lot of the concerns that Swindon fans might have about the direction that we're moving under Scott Lindsey. For all the reasons that I would like to see him in as part of the management team, that he's all about engagement, excitement, identity, passion, connection with the crowd. Me personally, I think it's a masterstroke.
Absolutely, you can't go wrong with a little Scottish man, can you?
No, but listen, look, it's parking all the romanticism, right? It just fits. It just fits. Like you've got a guy there that he's already got some of his coaching badges. He's on an upwards trajectory in that respect. You know, he's having to appreciate he still lives up north. So at the moment, he's got a nice little gig on the side with Fleetwood, which from what I understand, is a part-time thing. Mm-hmm. He has captained our football team to the title, and he's been part of the championship winning side under Richie Wellens. He's done it twice. He knows what it takes. I love the fact there is something about seeing Paul Caddis on, in and around Swindon Town. He has played football at the very, very highest level. He has graduated from a legendary production line that is Glasgow Celtic in terms of producing players with the right identity, the right attitude towards football, the right type of football. He has played against the Barcelonas of this world in the Champions League. He has marked Lionel Messi. It brings it ticks that romantic box. Of course it does, but it's all underpinned by solid footballing principles. I mean, Chris, from your perspective, I mean, Joe's at one sort of end of the supporting spectrum. Again, you're a little bit more sort of like closer to my age. Who would be your choice of number two, and why is the right answer Paul Caddis? And how would you feel about him in the dugout?
First of all, can I just throw one spanner in the works here with Scott Lindsey's history? And say Mark Cooper, they've worked together a lot? Would he be someone he would bring in?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think that's dangerous ground, Chris. I really do. I think that the thing is, like, Cooper has been the manager at Swindon, and yeah, there was talk of him being undermined, by other sort of persons through the door at Swindon Town during his time. That was always a rumour that seemed to swirl when Cooper was manager of Swindon Town. I think he's managed, just down the road, increasingly one of our rivals, where he didn't exactly cover himself in glory in terms of how he engaged with their supporter base. And there are a lot of Forest Green fans that have got a real bitter taste in their mouth in relation to Mark Cooper. I think it's just that thing about going from being a manager to a number two at a club where you were manager, and you're now number two to somebody that has moved up from being a number two to a manager. I think it creates a whole host of unnecessary noise. But I do get your point. Would you say that Cooper would be your choice then, Chris?
No, it was just as we were thinking of who would come in, I was thinking, would Lindsey want to go with someone he was familiar with more than anything? But as you saw before in the WhatsApp group, one of the first things after Lindsey was appointed, I said, let's get Caddis in. So I think you know my answer on that one.
Yeah, and I think it's wise. Dean, I'll get you back in at this stage. I mean, have you got a preferred choice as assistant to Lindsey?
I've not really. I won't lie to you. I've not really thought about it. No, yeah, I've not really thought about it. Caddis, does tick the boxes. Don't get me wrong. I think I'd certainly like to see him come in as a coach of some sort before he got the gig. So, I was quite glad in a non-horrible way that he didn't get the gig. I just think it's a bit too early. And I'd hate to see someone like him. We're not the most patient of fans, are we? Let's not kid ourselves. If things go wrong in the first couple of weeks, months, are they going to be as supportive? I don't think we sang Garner's name, did we, till the playoffs? So, it's very hard.
I think
sometimes.
it's an interesting one, Dean. I think Paul Caddis sort of would have, if he'd got the top job. I mean, I know we're just talking theoreticals now, aren't we? If he'd got the top job, I think he would have been afforded a lot more patience than potentially even Scott Lindsey in that respect, if results took a turn against him.
Is that a good thing? League. Do we want to say, we're 12th, but it's Paul Caddis, we like him. We want to get out of the league. I don't think it's time for sentiment this season. I think we've just got to get out and then progress from there. That's my opinion. I might be wrong, but
I think you make a valid point, Dean. I think, to be honest, and fair play to Sandro Di Michele. He kind of made reference to that, didn't he, last week when he gave his first interview? That it's not one for romanticism. This is about we need to get results. They've clearly decided on an ethos. They're going to be working with statistical based analysis moving forward. They're going to be picking teams to win matches. I didn't get the impression.
I've got the ideal scenario. I've just thought about it then. I think what we do is we get Caddis in as assistant. We get promoted this season. Ben Garner gets sacked. Lindsey goes to Charlton. We promote Caddis.
Oh, goodbye.
That's the only way I can see it working.
Can you imagine? All right. Well, that's fair to say. Then
speaking there about Caddis for a minute, Hannes, I think that maybe bringing Caddis in as not so much as the assistant, but as a first team coach, i.e., so basically number 3, might be a better fit for him because he's not really got that experience as a coach, and he can bring on and step up from there. And then maybe we could have someone with a bit more experience to help Lindsey out.
Do you know what? I would love that, Chris, and I think that would suit Paul down at the ground as well. And I think if we're going to stay true to this kind of mantra that we lose a manager, we don't lose the entire kind of ethos of the club. I think that fits quite nicely into it from a point of view that I can imagine Paul Caddis not being somebody that would come back to Swindon Town and attach himself tightly to whoever it is that is head coach, and indeed the assistant. And I could see him coming in with a view to continuing his development as a coach, continuing to get his qualifications with because I think Paul's been very open about it. At some point in time, his ambition is to be manager of Swindon Town Football Club. And I think from that point of view, if there can be a gateway for him to achieve that, under the tutelage of more experienced coaches, then I think that's a very good shout, Chris. What's so all right, Chris, you've gone Caddis. I think Dean's just about got his at least 1.5 feet in the Caddis camp. Nathan, where's your thinking at in terms of the makeup of the coaching staff and the role of the assistant and indeed the number 3?
I mean, I haven't heard, or I didn't hear Lindsey say about Marshall, so I think he might stay. I need to listen again, but I haven't heard anything concrete about him going. Assuming that he does go, I wouldn't mind Caddis as a coach. I think Chris just said it. Like if he was a number 3, a first team coach, I think that would be perfect. Bringing Caddis in as a number 2, I think if you kind of remove the sentiment, if it's a player who hasn't played for Swindon Town and it's Paul Caddis's career and you bring him in as number 2, you're probably asking a few questions. So in that respect, I don't think I'd like Caddis as a number 2, but I would like him at the club. My only thought to that is I think I don't know if it's well known or not, but it seems to be by a few people that Caddis applied for the job or Caddis spoke about the job. And, if you're Scott Lindsey and you've got a coach being appointed that who's gone for your job, are you thinking, hey, maybe this guy's after my job? I don't know. I don't know Scott Lindsey well enough. I don't even know if Callis would want to come down here as a first team coach, given that he does have I think it's only part time, like you said, but he's working for a Celtic legend now at Fleetwood, who they're a small club, but they're well funded and they're run well. So would he give that up to come to Swindon? Probably not, as much as he loves it here. So yeah,
it's an interesting one, Nathan, because I don't necessarily think. I mean, Paul Caddis was at Fleetwood before Scott Brown took over as manager up there, and I don't think I think it would be probably lazy of us to assume that just because you've got a couple of ex-Celtic boys there that that you'd have any kind of sort of shoe in. I'm sure Paul won't sort of mind me sort of speaking on, out of a little bit out of school here, but I asked Paul that question directly in relation to Scott Brown's appointment from a perspective of similar to what you just said there. Ex Celtic legend, you must be over the moon. It's like, that must mean that opens surely doors for you, and it was quite clear that wasn't part of Scott Brown's appointment up at Fleetwood. That Paul Caddis would automatically move into his slipstream and move forward. What has been a consistent, however, from Paul Caddis is his passion for this football club, and I think Paul Caddis is professional enough that he would just get his head down, be very, very supportive of the manager. I mean, I cast your mind back to the very dreary days of John Sheridan, and even when things were at their absolute worst, Caddis wasn't looking to come out and throw John Sheridan under a bus to curry favour with the Swindon Town supporters, or progress his own sort of situation in any way, shape, or form. I see Paul being very, very professional in that respect. I think, another name that we are missing here, and Max, I'll get your take on this. We're obviously we've already got a couple of very, very interesting heads through the door. We've got Mildy doing a great job with the goalkeepers, but we've also got Lee Peacock as well, who nobody's mentioned tonight. Potentially sort of moving in, sort of graduating up from working with the junior sides and the academy set up, and potentially moving in as part of a 1-2-3 with Lindsey. I mean, the idea of Lindsey, Lee Peacock, Paul Caddis as a management 1-2-3 on the touchline. I mean, surely that's got to excite you, Max.
You've pretty much taken the words out of my mouth. I was going to come on and say that I think Wise and Peake's been mentioned, because I think he'd probably be the perfect number 2. I don't know if he was about the academy when Scott was the under-18s manager or not, but obviously he's definitely been about with him this year. So it's someone that he's familiar with, someone who's familiar with the club, is a well-experienced coach, knows the team, knows the players. I think that Peakes is probably the perfect option to be number 2, to be honest. And yeah, Caddis, it's a question of I think he would make a good first team coach, but it's whether he's going to uproot everything he's got up in the northwest to come all the way down. Is he going to uproot everything to be a coach? I'm not sure he would.
I think a lot depends on the levels of security that's on offer, and I appreciate football is not a career that sort of offers huge security, but I think if the sell-in to Paul Caddis is around a place where, look, this is a club where you're known, where you're loved, where you will get an awful lot out of both emotionally and professionally representing Swindon Town Football Club. And there is going to be, our mechanism moving forward is that we want coaches to graduate and move up positions as and how head coaches move off to other jobs. I mean, if I was him, that feels like a bit of a no-brainer to me. And I mean, also,
so I guess the onus is on the club to put that package towards him, right?
Yeah, because financially, clearly, it's got to work. Paul's got a family. You would like to think that he wouldn't necessarily want to have that commute. But again, as a managerial 1-2-3, those duties could potentially be shared around. But realistically, you kind of want your 3 coaches around full time, don't you? But I think the interesting thing for me, Max, is that what we haven't mentioned about Paul Caddis this week is that he's officially come out and hung up his playing boots, hasn't he? And he's really kind of put his stake in the ground about his coaching future. And crucially, he wasn't able to fulfill his obligations to informal or otherwise, to on the sofa. Now, I know from speaking to Paul and how much he values people such as Vic Morgan and indeed ourselves, that's not something Paul would have just done on a whim. You know, if Paul makes a commitment to come on and talk on a show, he absolutely sticks to that. He's very, very professional. So
No, yeah, 100%.
That's got me feeling pretty bloody excited about things. Now, you know, consider that, you know, I mean, I would like to think that maybe Scott Lindsey would have been making phone calls, you know, before tonight and being appointed. We don't know the nature of how that appointment's gone and happened, do we really? But if you, I appreciate there's a little bit of 2 and 2 and getting 5 here, but it kind of feels to me that all the stars are aligning, Max. I don't know how that feels to you.
Yeah, no, when you put it that way, yeah, he's definitely one of those that he commits to a lot of those opportunities, whether he's going on with the OSC or if he goes on LS Pod with Rich or whether he comes near with us. Yeah. Maybe he was out coaching at Fleetwood and he got the message that he got home about 6 o'clock. You never know.
Yeah, no, indeed, you never know. Well, look, Claire, I'll take your view. Really, who is your preferred choice in the dugout alongside Scott Lindsey?
Oh, well, the romanticist says Caddis all day long. Of course it does. Who wouldn't? But I mean, he would be great as a number 2 or number 3 for all the reasons that a lot of you have already mentioned. That I've already thought of myself, but you've all beat me to it. But I am very conscious of not doing the same with a potential number 2 as we've done with Scott Lindsey, and then we're all disappointed again. So it's a bit of a difficult one for me. But like you said, if Caddis was to come, you know he's going to give 100%. I'm just not sure how the data analysis style coaching would fit in with Caddis's background and his coaching journey. Is it something he can cross paths with, or, you know, I'm not sure. But who wouldn't want Caddis at the club? Just the pure passion and commitment that's required. You know he's going to give it.
See,
but
I think
whoever comes in as a number 2 will get my support for the reasons they've been chosen. And I'm it's hard. I'm torn between bigging someone up and not making whoever it is feel less worthy if they get announced instead. The same as we've done with Lindsey, you know.
Claire, that's that maternal instinct in you, and I don't blame you because I get that. I really do get it. That here we are. Like, I mean, you know, a lot of what we've talked about tonight, Claire, has been about the fact that we're almost kind of like offering a sort of pseudo apology to Scott Lindsey because you know we all opened up by saying underwhelming. But to address a couple of your points, Claire, I think that the thing about statistical analysis, it feels to me that is more of a recruitment issue as opposed to a coaching issue. And I know for a fact that Paul has been a coach, has been not only coaching but playing in an era where, you know, it is standard for players to have GPS trackers on them. You know, it's standard for that level of analysis in terms of their output on the pitch to be scrutinised. So I don't think that's going to be a big stretch. And I think if recruitment is going to basically be handled by anyone at the football club, it's going to be Sandro Di Michele who's going to be feeding into that his statistical analysis into our head coach, and then they're collectively, along with probably Rob. And then obviously the ultimate sign off from Clem, making decisions on bringing players in. So I don't necessarily have any concerns per se about the statistical aspect of it. But Tom, to bring you back in, I mean, to Claire's point, it's a valid one, isn't it? You know, we've talked tonight about vanity appointments and not getting swept away as Swindon Town fans. You know, to what extent are we kind of allowing ourselves just through this show to kind of repeat bad habits?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to be pretty careful, to be honest. I like the idea of Caddis coming into the club, but we need to remember, really, like one of the things really that I think everybody got maybe a little bit disheartened about with Scott Lindsey's appointment is the perceived lack of experience. Yet we've completely overlooked that with Caddis on the basis that he was a great player for us. but from a coaching and and man management side of stuff, he doesn't really have any experience of that. So putting him in number 2, I think, might be a bit of a stretch. I would definitely welcome him as a first team coach to get that experience and continue with his badges, and see how he progresses. Maybe not if Scott Lindsey does leave next season, promote him straight into management, like Dino was saying. But yeah, I would be more in favour of a really dynamic, experienced assistant manager coming in that probably Scott Lindsey knows from all of his other experiences in clubs. And you'll always get surprised by those assistant managers of who actually comes in, because there's a web of contacts that these guys in the background of football all have. And you're like, how do you guys know each other? I go, well, we just do. So I think we might be in for a surprise. But I personally hope so. I think it'll be nice to bring some fresh blood into the club, somebody that we're not that much of an affinity with, that does bring a different edge, just to give us that little bit of perspective, and not be drawn into the emotion appointments, really.
Yeah, it is that whole piece, isn't it? I mean, we spent a large segment of this show, talking about sanity over vanity. That we've almost got to kind of like shift our mindset. But fundamentally, we are at heart, aren't we, Tom, as football fans? Old romantics, and you can't. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, Tom, isn't it? To not glance around our kind of coaching setup and go, wouldn't it be amazing to see Lee Peacock given an opportunity to step up? Wouldn't it be amazing to see Paul Caddis brought into that vacuum? I mean, I cast my mind back to the Richie Wellens era, and at one point, I was looking at Richie Wellens and Noel Hunt, and I was hearing Noel Hunt talk. And Noel Hunt had been seen as being very much a Lee Power appointment. But it was like, as a consequence of not having a close tie to Richie, you can see what's going on here. Richie will move on. Noel Hunt will step up. And then as Noel Hunt steps up, you can imagine Paul Caddis coming into the coaching setup. And then behind him, you've got people like Matt Bowdry. You've got people like Anthony Grant. Experienced pros that you would hope would be kind of like, pulled along in that, as the vacuum sort of opens up. And it fundamentally just didn't happen. That was something that I allowed myself to get swept away with. So, but at the same time, Lee Peacock's very settled in the area. Lee Peacock has helped sort of steer us through very, very choppy seas, along with Steve Mildenhall last summer. And you would hope, if he is up for it, that he'd be given an opportunity to sort of step in and continue to develop his coaching career. And like I say, fundamentally, if he steps up, I can't think of a better individual to sort of bring into the Swindon Town family than Paul Caddis, whether that be replacing Lee Peacock and his academy duties or coming into a role on the bench. I mean, me personally, I would like to. I think I've made it quite clear. I'd like to see him on the bench at Swindon Town for sure. Well, look. Okay, listen. I mean, we've spoken quite a lot about the managerial situation, and I guess that we'll move on from that. We've talked about the. It sounds like the signing of Sol Brynn, the Middlesbrough academy graduate, who appears to be joining Swindon Town in the next sort of 24, 48 hours. We've also got the small matter of the Papa John's Trophy draw and I know that's going to generate groans across the listener base, but nonetheless, interesting draw for Swindon Town. We're going to be playing Bristol Rovers, we're going to be playing Plymouth Argyle, and an as of yet unannounced but invited Premier League under 21 side.
That will be Arsenal or Chelsea, because it always is.
That's going to be Arsenal or Chelsea, Chris, is it? You're certain about that? Well, listen, Rovers, Argyle, Arsenal or Chelsea will at least give some of our youngsters and fringe players an opportunity to stretch their legs. Chris, have you got any interest? Has there been anything that's happened with the Papa John's Trophy? We didn't do too bad last year. Is there anything that's got you more excited this year about it than last?
No, well, I was at work today. Actually, sat next to a lad who's a Hartlepool fan, whose brother actually works with my sister, believe it or not, in Hartlepool, and there was just nothing there at all. It's like such a waste of a tournament. I was actually speaking to another guy I work with, and what said is, let's bring back the Italian Anglo-Italian Cup. That was a bit more interesting than the Papa John's.
Me personally, Chris, listen, don't get me started. It's always going to be a question of cost. The problem with the Anglo-Italian Cup is obviously airfare, hotels. It's an expensive business. I think for me, I would like to see us, introduce some form of Celtic Cup, where we're playing the best of lower league Scotland, the best of lower league Wales, Northern Ireland, and indeed Southern Ireland. That is something I would be very, very keen on. But it kind of goes against the ethos of what they've tried to achieve with Papa John's, isn't it? Very, very, it's very regional. And
it is. I just think it's a tournament. Most teams just they use as basically the same way they use their reserve team. There's and in fact, actually, I think Joe mentioned in the group earlier, he brought the lineup back out, and it was very interesting as well that we made subs after something like 3 and 16 minutes just to get round the stupid rules of changing your teams.
Oh, it's totally daft. I mean, listen, Chris, from my perspective, I would like to see, even though the kind of, the Premier League clubs and the top Championship clubs have sort of denigrated the Football League, the League Cup. I would like to see some form of seeding system where, if you progress onto an area final, or indeed you progress onto the final, then you receive preferential treatment going into the League Cup, and you get a bye, into the rounds a little further up, further through the tournament. The issue with that, of course, is one, or well, there are a whole host of issues there, unfortunately. But I mean, fundamentally, it does deprive clubs of that opportunity to blood the likes of the Ricky Aguiars of this world, the Harrison Minturns of this world, the Winchcombes of this world, lads that came in and actually showed us that they've got a little bit about them. I mean, we wouldn't have seen much of Mo Darbre, would we, last season, had it not been for the Papa John's Trophy, and we wouldn't, it gives those guys an opportunity to sort of, but I can't help but think that you look at some of our other tournaments, even the FA Cup. I appreciate you're talking about the FA and the Football League being different organisations, but there needs to be a greater incentive, whether that be financial, or whether that be the opportunity to maybe lesser their fixture congestion, but give a bigger payday opportunity much further down the line of the trophy. Of a cup run, but I just can't see it happening. If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. And I think the issue is, of course, we are campaigning as the little fish here, and we're going to the bigger fish with our hands out, and you don't tend to get much joy when that's the case, do you?
No, it's just a pointless. I like you say, it's a great chance for some of these younger lads, but sometimes playing one game every 3 or 4 weeks isn't really helping, because sometimes you're better off going to, say, someone like Chippenham on loan and playing week in, week out, than playing one game and then not playing for 3 weeks.
Yep. I said, no, I completely agree. I mean, we've got, I've noticed we've got, a few of the sort of players' families have jumped on and are on the listener list at the moment. I would be fascinated if any of those guys could send us a speaker request and come on in and give us a perspective as to, how they feel, their sons' careers have been assisted with the help of the Papa John's Trophy and getting first team minutes under their belt. Because I think, listen, at the end of the day, we haven't got a we haven't got a reserve string. We've got a development squad that the development squad have got to be given opportunities to play football and to play in front of the crowds at the county ground and some of these away games. It's an opportunity that they're always going to snap up, but I excuse the expression, I think we're kind of piddling in the wind, Chris, in that respect. It's just wishful thinking. Well, a little bit of, I guess as we draw the show to a close. Got some interesting news. It's going to be a busy week on the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge. There are a couple of irons in the fire, of which I can't talk about, and conversations ongoing with the club and whatnot. But we've also got a big show planned for Thursday, haven't we? Not, Chris, because obviously we've got fixture list being released, but we've also got former Town, what's the best word to describe him? Mercurial number 10, Giuliano Grazioli. Graz is going to be joining us on Thursday night for a round of just daft questions. So anyone that's listened to the show, or if you're a new listener to the show, we bring in Swindon Town legends, past and present, and just have an hour of fun with them. Let their hair down and have a bit of a giggle, mainly at our expense. But please do start sending your daft questions in for Giuliano Grazioli, who's going to be joining us, and he's very, very excited to reacquaint with the Swindon Town supporter base. Chris, I'll tell you an interesting story. As I was talking to Gratz earlier in the week, he said to me that it's always fascinated him that as a former Swindon striker, he said he was never prolific in a Swindon Town shirt, but he cannot believe how well regarded he is and remains whenever he's approached or spoken to by Swindon Town fans. He's always really fondly remembered. Do you have any particular standout memories of Gratz, Chris?
I just think we just love our strikers, though, don't we? We've been blessed, though, down the years. We've had some great ones. Thinking I just remember him as like you say, it's not wasn't overly prolific, but he just looked like such a natural goal scorer. There's not one in particular thing that really jumps out, but it just for me, just about most of his goals just seemed natural. He just seemed to know where to be.
Yeah, I think you're right. And a regular Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge contributor, Nick Judd, who I know Nick's listening tonight. Good evening, Nick. But Nick will tell you, as someone that worked behind the scenes of the football club when Gratz was here, he described Gratz as being one of the good guys. And I think the thing that I said to Giuliano, one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to getting together with him and all of you guys again on Thursday night from 9, is that he played with a certain pride. He absolutely busted a gut in a Swindon Town shirt. Even though he wasn't the most prolific, he played like he cared, and I think that's obviously you can't really ask for any more, any less than that. I think there was a certain limit to his ability in terms of sort of going up the leagues, but also fundamentally, Gratz was and remains a really, really good bloke. And that's going to shine through on Thursday night. I've got absolutely no doubt about that, because he's certainly up for a bit of a giggle with us. But look, as the time's edging towards 10 to 11, I think we'll draw it to a close. It's been a fascinating show, taking everyone's points of view. Been brilliant hearing Dean come on the show. Lovely to hear from Claire. To my regulars, Joe, Chris, Nathan, Max, thank you ever so much for coming on. And Tom Parrish from the Trust. Tom, an absolute treat having you on for your show debut. Please make sure it is your first of many. But until now, until Thursday, guys, we'll wrap things up. And I will just close by saying Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge is an independent Swindon Town Twitter space. Its views do not represent those of Swindon Town Football Club or indeed Sir Tom Broadbent himself. It's been an absolute pleasure having your ears. Look forward to catching up with you again on Thursday.